All right, we're going to be in Hosea, and we're going to try to run all the way through Hosea because there's so many neat things that you'll recognize from this prophecy. But let me remind you kind of where we are historically. This is just after Jehu was king, and Jehu is the one that wipes out the lineage of Ahab. So God gets the final say as far as Ahab's family. Jezebel is dead. Hosea is prophesying about things that are going to happen in the area. So there's, when we talked about other prophets in this era, we're not just talking about Israel, we're talking about the fact that Assyria is getting stronger and stronger, and they're going to come in, and then following them, Babylon will come in and will pretty much dominate the whole area. So Hosea has some things to say about that, but he prophesies for a very long time, maybe as many as 5 decades. We have bits and pieces of the things that he shared. Probably was from the north, prophesying in the north. If you remember when Amos was prophesying, he was from the south, and he didn't ever want to be a prophet in the first place. He was neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet. He was a shepherd and the tender of sycamore fig trees. And then God got his hooks in him, and he had to go and prophesy and say some things that people really didn't want to hear. Hosea's name is very similar to the name Yeshua, or Jesus, as we would know it, which means God saves or God delivers. So Hosea has a great name and a tough job to do. Let's start in chapter 1 and look at the part of it that most people are most familiar with. The word of the Lord came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and during the reigns of Jeroboam, son of Jehoash, the king in Israel. When the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, I want you to go marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her, for like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord. So if you're going to be a visual aid in God trying to teach his people, this is not the job you want. God says, I want you to go and to particularly on purpose marry a woman that you know is going to cheat. That's the woman I want you to have, so that you'll understand and you can help Israel to understand what it feels like when someone that you love and someone that you give yourself to cheats on you. And so Hosea's job is to marry a woman of ill repute, an adulterous wife, so that he can have the ability to speak to the people. So he married a woman named Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. I want you to notice the language there. She conceived and bore him a son. It does not say that he knew her and she conceived. So we're pretty sure that this first child is a child that the two of them bore together, but we don't know 100% for sure. Because usually in the Old Testament, you get that little formula. He knew his wife and she bore him a child. Well, she bears him a child, maybe his, maybe not his. The Lord said to Hosea, I want you to name him Jezreel, because I will soon punish the house of Jehu for the massacre at Jezreel. I will put an end to the kingdom of Israel. In that day I will break Israel's bow in the valley of Jezreel. So this kid is going to be stuck with the name of a valley, which is not a terrible thing. There were lots and lots of battles that took place in the Jezreel Valley. You remember when Gideon and his army were encircled in the hills, and they broke the pots and they held up the lanterns, a sword for God and for Gideon, and they ran down into the valley. That was the Jezreel Valley. So it's a famous place. It's a place that all of Israel would have recognized. It's also the place where Jehu got a little bit bloodthirsty when he was getting rid of the family of Ahab. Not only did he kill Ahab's family, he killed everybody that was friends of theirs. He killed anybody that was associates of theirs. He killed a huge number of Baal priests and priestesses, which sounds like a good thing, but it wasn't necessarily what God told him to do. So he took what God told him to do with Ahab's family and just kept going. So there was a big massacre in the Jezreel Valley. And God says, I'm going to get back at the household of Jehu for what he did. So Jehu is, his dynasty is not going to last either. Verse 6, Gomer conceived again and gave birth to a daughter. This time it does not say that she bore him a daughter. This time it just says she conceived and gave birth to a daughter. The Lord said to Hosea, call her Lo Ruhamah, which means not loved. Okay, you want to go to kindergarten with that name? Going around the room, you know, hi Sally and Lucy and Bootsy and not loved. I will no longer show love to Israel, that I should forgive them. Yet I will show love to Judah, and I will save them, not by bow or sword or battle, or by horses or by horsemen, but I, the Lord their God, will save them. And there should be a little clause there, because at this point, Judah is being faithful. But as time goes by, Judah is no longer faithful, and God no longer saves them. Eventually, Judah is taken by Babylon. After she had weaned Lo Ruhamah, Gomer had another son. Then the Lord said, call him Lo Ami, which means not my people. You are not my people, and I am not your God. So if the last two in particular do not belong to Hosea, think about what their names say to him, right? Unloved. It could be a point toward Hosea. She doesn't love you. She's not interested in being your wife. She's had another child, perhaps by another man, and you are unloved. It could be a sign that Gomer is saying to, or that Hosea is saying to Gomer, I can't love you because you're like this. But God is saying, I don't love Israel anymore. And I want them to understand what it's like to treat me so badly for so long that one who loved them and catered to them and took care of them, you're not loved anymore. And then the final one, Lo Ruhamah, you're not my people. This is not my son. This is somebody else's son that you have born in my house, under my roof. I'm not going to have it, says Hosea. God says, Israel, I took such good care of you, brought you up out of Egypt, but now you are no longer my people. So that's the part that most people know about Hosea, the fact that he has to have this prostitute, this unfaithful woman for his wife. The end of chapter 1 is a happy oracle, though. We don't have to get all the way to the end of Hosea to get the turnaround and don't worry, there's good news. We get it at the end of chapter 1, verse 10. The Israelites will be like the sand on the seashore, which cannot be measured or counted. In the place where it was said to them, you're not my people, they will be called children of the living God. The people of Judah and the people of Israel will come together. They will appoint one leader and will come up out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. So we get a happy oracle right behind the three illegitimate children. God says, you're not my people, but eventually you will be. So we get that happy promise at the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2, there's a lot about Israel being set aside. Go over to chapter 4. Chapter 4. I want us to just look at some of the things from the Old Testament that make sense as far as our understanding of the New Testament. Chapter 4, verses 8 and 9. We'll start there. This is God presenting his case. Remember we talked about God being the prosecuting attorney and the judge. This is one of those passages where he's reading off the crimes, reading off the accusations. This is about the priests. They feed on the sins of my people and relish their wickedness. And it will be like people, like priests. I will punish them. I will punish both of them for their ways and repay them for their deeds. They will eat but never have enough. They will engage in prostitution, but they will not flourish, because they have deserted the Lord to give themselves to prostitution. Old wine and new wine take away their understanding. My people consult a wooden idol, and a diviner's rod speaks to them. A spirit of prostitution leads them astray. They are unfaithful to their God. So he keeps coming back to that word, right? The NIV translates it that way. They have a spirit of prostitution. To whom are they prostituting themselves? False gods, right? So his accusation against them is that the priests are the problem, and that they are leading the people away from him, and all the people are going up to the high places. All the people are worshiping false items. They're getting rich off the people. When you get to the New Testament and Jesus goes to the temple and he throws over the money changers' tables and he chases the animals out of the temple and he says, Scripture says that my house will be a house of prayer, but you've turned it into a den of thieves. So the same kind of attitude that was present in Jesus' day was present back in Hosea's day as well. Look over at chapter 6. We have what sounds very much like a messianic prophecy. Chapter 6, beginning in verse 1. Come, let us return to the Lord. He has torn us to pieces, but he will heal us. He has injured us, but he will bind up our wounds. After 2 days, he will revive us. On the third day, he will restore us, that we may live in his presence. Let us acknowledge the Lord. Let us press on to acknowledge him. As surely as the sun rises, he will appear. He will come to us like the winter rains, like the spring rains that water the earth. So after 2 days, on the third day, then he'll restore us. It's kind of a neat way of making that statement. Does it sound familiar? Well, of course, right? We immediately, you say third day, we don't have to think twice as to what third day references. So perhaps God is, through Hosea, dropping hints about the idea that Jesus, having been raised on the third day, would be restorative to the nation of Israel. Look down at verse 6. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings. Does that sound familiar? Look over at Matthew chapter 9. Matthew chapter 9, we'll start in verse 9. When Jesus calls Matthew to be one of his apostles, there's a party in his honor. Look at verse 10. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and with his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? On hearing this, Jesus said, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. So he quotes directly from Hosea's prophecy to try to inform the Pharisees that there's something more important than what they think is important. Look at chapter 7, verse 11. All through this section, you keep running into Ephraim. Anybody know who Ephraim is? Do you remember? Like, will the real Ephraim please stand up? Who was Ephraim? There were 2 sons that were born to Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh. When they got to the promised land, then Joseph's inheritance was divided, and you got Ephraim and Manasseh both got part of the promised land. So you don't have a tribe of Joseph in the promised land. You've got the tribe of Ephraim and the tribe of Manasseh, so the half tribes of those two. So they got a little bit more inheritance than everybody else. Ephraim is a very large area, but Manasseh is even larger. Manasseh is up a little bit farther north than where Ephraim is. But Ephraim is where Samaria is. So anytime in Hosea when you're reading and you see God saying something about Ephraim did this or Ephraim did that, he's not talking about the whole tribe in general. He's talking about Samaria, the capital of Israel. So the capital of the northern tribe where all the problems are coming from, he just refers to them as Ephraim. 7:11, Ephraim is like a dove, easily deceived, senseless, now calling to Egypt, now turning to Assyria. When they go, I will throw my net over them. I will pull them down like the birds in the sky. When I hear them flocking together, I will catch them. Woe to them, because they have strayed from me. Destruction to them, because they have rebelled against me. I long to redeem them, but they speak about me falsely. They do not cry out to me from their hearts, but they wail on their beds. They slash themselves, appealing to their gods for grain and new wine, but they turn away from me. So, slashing themselves, you might think back to Elijah on Mount Carmel, and he says, you make a altar for Baal, and I'll make an altar for Yahweh, and we'll see who the real God is. Well, they start dancing around their altar, trying to call down fire from heaven. They don't get any, so they start slashing themselves with rocks. It was one of their rituals, we'll bleed so that our God will notice us, so that our God will do something for us. And they did a lot of bleeding, but their God is a false God, so he did not answer them. But anyway, Ephraim, all of these accusations against Ephraim are accusations against the seat of government in Samaria. Look at chapter 8, verse 11. Though Ephraim built many altars for sin offerings, those have become altars for sinning. I wrote for them the many things of my law, but they regarded them as something foreign. Though they offer sacrifices as gifts to me, and though they eat the meat, the Lord is not pleased with them. Now he will remember their wickedness and punish their sins, and they will return to Egypt. So during this time frame, there's all kinds of war and problems going on. I don't know whether he meant that they would literally be taken captive into Egypt, which was not impossible, or whether it just means they came out of captivity and now I'm sending them back into captivity. So it may be that Assyria is kind of the new Egypt, where they're going to be dragged off into exile. It's a good argument for the fact that they built the altars and they knew the way to do the worship, but they weren't pleasing to God. Right? Their hearts are not turned toward Yahweh. They're worshiping idols, but they still have places, high places, where they go for Yahweh worship. And they know how to do it. And they've got the right altar to do it. But God's not accepting their worship. It's mixed in with their worship of false gods. So they're not dedicated to him. They've just still got him on the list of people that they're worshiping. Kind of like when Paul was on Mars Hill, and he says, as I was coming up here, I noticed all of your monuments to all these different gods. And I noticed one that said, to the unknown God. That's the one I want to talk about. So they didn't want to leave anybody out. So they still had the to the unknown God monument there. The people in Hosea's day, they still had an altar for God, but it was just another altar. It wasn't their chief God. It wasn't their heartfelt relationship to God. It was just another one. Well, how did they get that way? How many generations does it take to go from we belong to Yahweh to we belong to Baal or to the calf god or whoever else they were worshiping? It doesn't take many generations, does it? Right? You've still got the church building. You've still got the place. You still know how to do church. But is your heart connected? Is it something you're doing because you really are connected to the God of Israel? Or is it something you're doing because there's a high place, and we're going to make a sacrifice, and we're going to eat the meat. By the way, that means that they were having communion. All right, when we talk about communion, we eat the communion to have communion with the Lord. They ate the meat of the sacrifice to have communion with God. And God says, I don't share a meal with you. You don't care about me. And their kids are coming up behind them. How long will it be before that altar is no longer used at all? Before they no longer know how to do those sacrifices? Before they no longer care about, daddy and granddaddy's and great-granddaddy's God? They move on to something else. Think about our culture. How long does it take? Doesn't take very long, does it? Just a few years, and things can change drastically. Chapter 9, verse 11. We talked, a few months ago, when we were in the Psalms, about imprecatory psalms. Imprecatory psalms are those that are really strongly worded. They're not nice. They're not meant to be nice. They're meant to show the anger of the writer. And they talk about things that we don't want to talk about. Well, here's God through Hosea talking to the people of Israel, or to Ephraim, to Samaria. Ephraim's glory will fly away like a bird. No birth, no pregnancy, no conception. Even if they rear children, I will bereave them of every one. Woe to them when I turn away from them. I've seen Ephraim like Tyre, planted in a pleasant place. But Ephraim will bring out their children to the slayer. Give them, Lord. What will you give them? Give them wombs that miscarry, breasts that are dry. Because of all their wickedness in Gilgal, I hated them there because of their sinful deeds. I will drive them out of my house. I will no longer love them. All of their leaders are rebellious. Ephraim is blighted. Their root is withered. They yield no fruit. Even if they bear children, I will slay their cherished offspring. My God will reject them because they have not obeyed him. They will be wanderers among the nations. So even if they have kids, I'll kill them. Okay. Who's this talking? God. Right? This is God saying to Israel, I'm cutting you off. I told Abraham that his seed would be like the sand on the seashore, like the stars of the heavens. But what I'm telling you is, even if you have kids, I'm cutting them off. He's probably talking about the Assyrian invasion. Hundreds of thousands of people are going to be killed. They're going to be dragged off into slavery. And as a result, the Israelite nation as a whole is just going to kind of be dissipated. They're going to be taken apart at the seams. So some pretty strong language. Chapter 10, verse 8. This one you might find familiar. Let's start in 7. Samaria's king will be destroyed, swept away like a twig on the surface of the waters. The high places of wickedness will be destroyed. It is the sin of Israel. Thorns and thistles will grow up and cover their altars. Then they will say to the mountains, cover us, and to the hills, fall on us. Since the days of Gibeah, you have sinned, Israel, and there you have remained. So this hills fall on us and mountains cover us up. Does that sound familiar? Revelation, you've got Revelation 6, 16 and 17. The evil ones, they're running away, they're hiding. It also shows up in Luke 23. Let's look at that one. Luke 23, verse 29. Somebody asked recently about whether this passage and the passage like it in Matthew is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem or the end of time. And sometimes it's difficult to tell the difference between the two. But look at 23:29. Let's start at 26. As the soldiers led him away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country. They put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. Large number of people followed him, including women who were mourning and wailing for him. Jesus turned and said to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children. For the time will come when you will say, 'Blessed are the childless women, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if people do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it's dry?" So he says, look, if they're doing this to me now, if they're doing this in the very beginnings of the kingdom, what's going to happen as things go by? I believe sincerely, if you take this one and compare it to what he says in Matthew, he's talking about the judgment against Israel in 70 AD, when the Roman army comes in and just obliterates the city of Jerusalem, tears it piece from piece from piece. When you get over to Revelation, you say, well, did John write before Jerusalem was destroyed or after? If he wrote after, then you've got the same quote about three different things. The coming destruction of Jerusalem between Assyria and Babylon, the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and then perhaps something later on toward the end of time. So all kinds of things where you might connect these things together, but lots and lots of questions surrounding it. But again, quoting directly from Hosea, when you're reading particularly in the Revelation, there's so much Old Testament being quoted in the Revelation that to really understand what John is saying, what Jesus is telling the angel to tell John, to tell the seven churches, you've got to know something about Old Testament prophecy because there's so much of it built in there. And as it's quoted over and over, you can go back to the Old Testament and go, well, oh, look, this is what it was about when it was originally uttered. And then something like this, you can look at in Jesus' time when he said the same thing. Well, what was that talking about? So it gives you some more insight, some more background. Back to Hosea, chapter 11, beginning in verse 1. This one maybe you'll recognize as well. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I have called my son. But the more they were called, the more they went away from me. They sacrificed to the Baals. They burned incense to the images. It was I who taught Ephraim to walk, taking him by the arms, but they did not realize it was I who healed them. I led them with cords of human kindness, with ties of love. To them I was like the one who lifts a little child to the cheek, and I bent down to feed them. Isn't that beautiful? Like little bitty children, God picked up Israel to his cheek. He snuggled Israel. He kissed Israel. He embraced Israel. He gave Israel a place to lay down to sleep that was secure. Right? At my house, you go to bed with Gaga is the privilege of privileges. Right? Gaga's going to bed now. Okay, I'm going, got to go lay down by Gaga because it's secure. When she leaves Gaga's side, is Papa going to carry me to my bed? Yes, Papa's going to carry you to your bed. Carry her in there, tuck her in, tell her good night. Okay? So, there's got to be that security. God says, that's what I gave Israel. What did they give me in return? They went after other gods. They didn't want me at all. So he's rejected by his people. But the very first part there, when Israel was a child, I loved him. Out of Egypt, I have called my son. Does that sound familiar? In Matthew, they find out that the Magi have tipped off Herod that they're in Bethlehem. And the angel says, not safe here. So Joseph takes Mary and Jesus to Egypt. They're in Egypt for a couple of years. When Herod the Great dies and Archelaus takes over, then he's told it's safe. You can go back home. And at that point, Matthew says, that's so that it could be fulfilled what the prophet said, out of Egypt I have called my son. So Hosea says it talking about the nation of Israel. In fact, talking about Ephraim, talking about Samaria, talking about the bad guys, right? They haven't been faithful to me. So we get a new, more faithful calling when Jesus and his family are called up out of Egypt. So he comes in. Now, he's always going to be faithful. He's going to do exactly what his father tells him to do, unlike the first group that got that quote back over in Hosea. Let's just go to chapter 14. We'll jump over to the end. In between, there's a lot of anger, a lot of accusations against Ephraim. But look at chapter 14. Return, Israel, to the Lord your God. Your sins have been your downfall. Take words with you and return to the Lord. Say to him, forgive all our sins and receive us graciously, that we may offer the fruit of our lips. What is the fruit of our lips? We want to offer the fruit of our lips, but we need you to forgive us first. What's the fruit of our lips? Praise. It's all about praise, right? We want to come and worship you, but we know that you don't want us to right now. You don't want to talk to us because we've done something so horrible that you've punished us, but we want to come back. How do we come back? Will you allow us to come back and be on good terms with you again? So receive us graciously so that we may offer the fruit of our lips. Assyria can't save us. We will not mount war horses. We will never again say our gods to what our own hands have made. For in you the fatherless find compassion. I will heal their waywardness and love them freely, for my anger has turned away from them. I will be like the dew to Israel. He will blossom like a lily. Like a cedar of Lebanon, he will send down his roots. His young shoots will grow. His splendor will be like an olive tree. His fragrance like a cedar of Lebanon. People will dwell again in his shade. They will flourish like the grain. They will blossom like the vine. Israel's fame will be like the wine of Lebanon. Ephraim, what more have I to do with idols? I will answer him and care for him. I am like a flourishing juniper. Your fruitfulness comes from me. Who is wise? Let them realize these things. Who is discerning? Let them understand. The ways of the Lord are right. The righteous walk in them, but the rebellious stumble in them. So again, you get that end of the prophecy, come back and be my people again kind of statement. Did you notice all of the references to Lebanon? Right? Lebanon in those days was an absolutely beautiful place full of cedar trees, if you couldn't get the references. When Solomon got ready to build the temple, he put in an order with a guy named Hiram, the king of Lebanon, and most of the temple was decked out in cedar. So it was absolutely, cedar and gold. How much nicer a place could you have for a temple? And the cedars were bought from Hiram up in Lebanon. So when you see those cedars of Lebanon, they were very famous during that time frame for all of their beautiful trees and forests that they had. Any questions or thoughts about Hosea in general? Remember where we are, right? The people of Israel have been so evil for so long. They've turned away God's calls. They've not listened to his prophets. They've worshiped Baals. They've worshiped calf gods. And God is getting tired of it. And he's getting ready to bring the Assyrians in to end Israel. But for a little while, Judah is going to remain. About 150 years or so, Israel will continue after after Israel is wiped out. Judah will continue for about 150 years or so. So we're getting to the nitty-gritty of that time frame when God's about to bring judgment. Nothing else? Okay. Tell you guys bye.